I think industry needs to understand that we've moved on, the world has moved on from a shareholder economy to a stakeholder economy. It's quite widely understood that your customers can impact the success of your business in a way it couldn't in the past.
Welcome to Talent is Everywhere, where we spotlight leaders using talent development and social impact to drive both corporate social responsibility and business success. So today we're lucky enough to have Maritha Erasmus with us, originally from South Africa, now based in Austria. And she is a social performance implementation specialist and compliance reporting expert. And she's the co-founder of Insite, which is a reporting and data governance solution around impact used in mining and heavy industries. So welcome, Maritha, to our podcast.
Thank you, Sylvie. I feel honored to be talking to you today.
Yeah, this is so fun, and I love getting new perspectives. And also, aside from that, we sort of share a common passion around impact. We're also both startup founders, and so I love, asking how people get started. And you've often told me, that you're guided by purpose, driven by impact. Yeah, so maybe you can just tell me how your philosophy shaped the starting of your company, the origin story, and more about what Insite does.
I started shortly after I graduated with a master's in sociology in the early 2000s. I started to work for a well-known company in South Africa that did development within the mining industry, taper development. And my initial job was really to write social and labor plans. South Africa was in the dawn of our democracy. And the newly promulgated MPRDA, Mining Petroleum Resources Development Act of 2004. And one of the requirements in this new act was that mining industry had to commit to social development, as part of their mining right license. They need to commit a 5-year plan to show how they will have a positive impact on the mining communities through local recruitment, skills development, local procurement, equity, female representation within the business, and also infrastructure development and poverty alleviation programs. So those were kind of like the topics of the social and labor plan. And I started with that as a new graduate. I was enthused by the idea of leveraging mining resources for socioeconomic development in South Africa with the history that we had in South Africa. So very passionate about it, very passionate about working with industry, to develop socioeconomic opportunities for underserviced communities, deeply impacted by the extractive industry. These social and labor plans then needed to be implemented. People had to do the commitments. And that led to death by Excel. Oh my goodness. It was the most amazing Excel worksheets you've ever come across. You can just imagine the different data reporting categories between HR and training and procurement and project management and the different mines and their core contractors. It was a nightmare. So after about 5 years, where I just couldn't cope with the lack of data integrity and the manual labor. And, you can't just report. If you report annually, you always just are backward looking and you just report what you didn't manage to achieve. You needed to have a management implementation tool. You needed something that management could look at monthly, daily, weekly, make decisions, actually do the commitments and not just report and troubles and struggles and barriers to entry and blockages. And because it takes so long to get the data together, 3-4 months just to get the data together, your report was just always backward looking. It frustrated me no end. And that is how I landed up in technology. And Inside was called SLP Xpacks in the beginning. In 2009, when we launched it, it was cloud-based, which was quite unheard of. 2009 to have cloud-based technology in the mining industry working on social performance data. Anyway, it reiterated over the years and into Insite, what is then known as Insite in 2014. We actually participated in a tech accelerator program in Estonia in the early days. And And under their guidance, we rewrote Insite into more modern architecture, still cloud native, modular, and really the birth of what Insite is now. In 2022, we sold MTS, which was the company and the product, to Acquire Technology Solutions. And, they own the platform now and continue to grow with it.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, amazing story and such a good arc. And yeah, so many tech tools, like the problem starts, from, like death by 1,000 Excels. Actually, I spend a lot of time in Excel, and you just think, like, how old do I have to get where I can achieve something without Excel? Probably never. And how did you find, I guess my first question is, I suppose, you've got all this data. It's like two sides. One is like making it easier to access, but then also like knowing what you're meant to report. And what did you find was the harder problem, like structuring what was needed to look at, or was the harder problem really like organizing the data? And I guess the background is like, what's the purpose? Like, is the purpose like to change how the company is operating, or just getting to that, just being able to like see the reality?
So the first problem we hit in 2009, 2010 when we launched was realizing that the companies actually didn't have the data that we needed to report on. It didn't exist in the ERP systems because it was new regulations.
And so like, what are some of the things, like what did they have to report? I mean, it was new, but like what kind of things were important or are important?
So in order to pay somebody, you needed the employee number. You didn't need to know where they came from, their home address and their work address. You certainly didn't need to know their race or their gender. You didn't need to know, there's a whole range, you didn't need to know their highest level of qualification. You didn't need to know, so there's a lot of information that was not hosted in the payroll system. It might be in a personnel file somewhere when they applied for a job. So it's not
right, like written with a pen on a paper.
It's written in a pen in a personnel file locked in a cupboard somewhere, but it's not in the ERP system that runs the payroll. So the very first problem we had to solve was to tell people the quality of their data. So we spend a lot of time and effort, and even today, in reporting on the quality of the data coming from your ERP system, in a way where you can use that information to decide which gaps you want to fill first, what is most important to know next. If you think about procurement, you paid the supplier. You didn't need to know all the details about the supplier, where their branch was, who's the owners, who's the shareholders, where they bought their product from, what was the product code. So you just think about the space, of ESG reporting, even the kind of information you have to report on. Where does the data live? It's fragmented, it's distributed. It doesn't all live in one ERP system. So the first problem we needed to solve was to be agnostic, that you can have many ways of entering data into Insite. And so it's aggregating data aggregation. And then reporting on the quality of the data that is now hosted on a platform. So one version of the truth, so one platform. And giving the user the opportunity to decide which data categories they wanted to mature first, because you can't fix everything at once. That's not data quality, and 100% accurate data is expensive. So it's important for companies to know the quality of their data and then to have the ability to choose whether they want to spend their resources in improving the maturity of a particular data category. That's what Insite did. So, and in the reports, then how does the quality of the data impact the quality of the report? So every report would have a data quality dial saying this report is 94% accurate. And if you click on 94% accurate, it tells you the missing data that impacts the bottom line report. So that you have informed decisions. It was all about helping our customers to make informed decisions about their data maturity, but also about their commitments. If it was local labor sending areas, those calculations and analysis is already done. So 40% of your labor is from the local community, and they are employed in the following skilled levels. So that in your capacity building programs, you could focus more on apprenticeships or whatever the case might be, if you needed to fill develop more or improve your local labor sending area statistics is how do you build capacity in the community in order to fill your future workforce needs.
You're right. Yeah. And I guess finally being able to see what you're doing. Right. Because, of course, if you're not even reporting on any of that, how are you even moving forward trying to be more sustainable? Yeah. I suppose it's interesting. There's a compliance and there is a new law, but, and sometimes one thinks, I feel like regulation often has like a bad reputation. But I mean, in this case, like it doesn't, in the sense that, these are, giving an incentive to companies to sort of, do the right thing. Because, of course, accessing more people and having a more diverse workforce, a different kind of skills, different kind of people. I mean, sort of like only good is going to come from that. And, once you were telling me about, the companies getting the data, you just mentioned now like maturity of data, but there must be something around, almost like switching on the light in the messy closet, that even by starting to aggregate all of this, you can get a sense of how mature or not you are. What's your experience with that? Like what kind of companies are, better prepared to launch these sorts of things and what they find?
Sylvie, that's a really good question. And we find that companies have different levels of data maturity within the same organization. So it's not a one-dimensional environment. Financial data is much more mature than other data categories. So any information around financial data is easy to access, and it will be mature and quite robust. Procurement data is often the next one, really well matured. And as you go down into the S, of people and then community data, it becomes more dusty. And it is switching on that light in the room when people start to realize that the reporting that they provided, they go through an audit and they get assurance findings. And then all of a sudden, because there's now a risk, it's now somewhere in the risk monitor of senior management. They go, oh, we need to do something about our data maturity. We've got an audit finding on our social data reporting. We don't want to be accused of blue washing. We don't want to be accused of over-reporting things. What's going on with our data management? And they like I said, that's the switch on in the dark room in the dusty corner. And it's important. It is quite overwhelming because one of the first starting points is people don't even know where the data resides because it's so fragmented and distributed. But until you start to map it and really look into it, it just remains a dark room. So it's important to be brave enough to switch the light on and to see the size of your mess, if I can put it like that. And actually, the idea came from Karinka van der Walt. She's an ESG reporting and data governance expert. In a conversation I had with her, and she also specializes in this space. And she said, it is once you start to understand the work you need to do to organize is when the light goes on. And a lot of companies just want to put the light back off. They actually, when you see the size of the mess, it's like, can we just be blind? But you can't. The longer you don't address it, the higher the risk in terms of your reporting, but also not making informed decisions. I think we should not underestimate the importance of making informed decisions and viewing your data as an asset, not just as a transaction. A lot of data still lives in the world of transactional data. We procured X, we employed somebody, we did things, and it's like, it's just a record of a transaction.
Right. And how have you found, I don't know very much about the mining industry other than, just what I read in the FT or in the Economist or whatever. But were you able to see, over all those years of working with them, having access to this data and this ESG reporting data did change behaviors in a good way? That beyond just, okay, we've got a risk, that maybe it changed the culture, it changed the priorities of management?
Oh, that's a deep question, and there's many answers to it. And it depends. The tone comes from the top. It depends on your leadership. So you will have leadership that's happy with just ticking boxes. So minimum requirements to put in the annual reports and meet the basic requirements, kind of like keep out of jail card sort of environment, where the minimum number of resources are allocated to make sure they can meet whatever the basic requirements are. Those kind of companies we find actually spend more money in the end because they're not forward thinking, they're not innovative in the way in which they solve their problem, and therefore they have to tick every box separately. Whereas if the tone from the top is, let's think innovatively around this, let's make this an internal part of our business, and let's connect the dots rather than tick the boxes, they often come up with solutions that would tick more than one box, having a bigger budget or bigger project, but that bigger project is long-term more sustainable and it ticks 3 or 4 or 5 boxes.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
But that comes from leadership, because they need to have long-term thinking, strategic thinking, implement it, really make it part of their DNA and say, how do we look at our business? How do we measure success?
Right. And that's so interesting, because I see the same thing. We're selling, like social education as social impact for companies. And on the one hand, all of these things that we do fundamentally can be a nice to have, in the sense that, yeah, okay, you can just hire some more people to do some awful Excels and, tick a box. And right, in the short term, that seems cheaper. But there's like this, yeah, as you say, like a broader, like virtuous circle of, imagine you're investing in education, and then the community is more happy with you. Then it's easier to hire people. Then you get better press. Then you get better sponsorships. Then you get better customer. I mean, it just creates like a broader vision. But I never thought of it like that is actually spend that option A can actually cost more money because they're just doing one thing at a time.
No, definitely costs more. I've seen it, that it costs more money. I will never forget, I was in a boardroom of an international mining house they were actually known in those days as the University of Mining, because of the amount of money they spend on developing STEM in schools and in universities. I mean, incredible programs, unbelievable programs of bursary and school development programs. But they had an employment equity problem. And it's because they never linked their skills development program with their recruitment program. It blew my mind. I was like, what?
Right. And that's such an obvious one, like that if you're going to be investing in education, and that's what we hope, that when we work with companies, they'll think like, okay, well, and then maybe it's a cynical way of looking at it, but it's sort of not. Like, if this is the mission of your company and you want to invest in something, let's do something that helps our industry, that helps our company, and reinvest it for ourselves.
Yeah, and it was just because it was the two metrics just didn't live next to each other on a dashboard, until we put it on a dashboard, because there was now a dashboard to look at. I'm sure, it is a while ago when this was fairly new, but that's just a very obvious, easy to understand example that maybe people experience now, where they might be doing capacity building programs, but they don't link it to their long-term recruitment workforce needs.
And how do you think about, like, in terms of reporting, like, how this links to supporting, how reporting will link to supporting underserved communities? And what do you think, companies, need to do? And especially in some of these, I think South Africa is such like an interesting case of, even after all these years, like post-apartheid, things are still, evolving so much, and the haves and the have-nots. But we see even, in America, lots of societies now, we see like big divides. And right, reporting is maybe the, like, I don't know, what can we say, the boring, the the technical view of it, but I think it can unlock like pretty important things. What do you think about that?
So reporting, it brings us back to that old saying, you manage what you measure. So if you start measuring something, people start to give resources towards managing it. And the reporting framework gives you a measurement framework, doesn't it? How you manage around that measurement framework will depend again from leadership, how leadership positions it. And if leadership starts with purpose, and then from purpose into policy into reporting, you get long-term visions and you get integrated activities that will, the implementation of the long-term vision and integrated activities will reflect in what they achieve in the report. So the report is an outcome of the implementation framework.
All right. And what do you think is their like responsibility to the community in that sense? Like, like how, what is the role of companies in terms of developing the communities where they operate?
I love that question. I think industry needs to understand that we've moved on. The world has moved on from a shareholder economy to a stakeholder economy. It's quite widely understood that your customers can impact the success of your business in a way it couldn't in the past. In the past, your customers are much closer to how they can impact the success of your business. But that brings me really to the understanding. Business needs to understand, as much as whatever they do, they impact the environment. And when I say environment, I mean both people and the physical environment. But in the same way, people and the physical environment impacts them. We are not, industry or companies is not an island. They're not separate from society. You are deeply integrated into society. And if you share that view, that a long-term view of the why and how you can change the way in which you do business to have a positive impact in society and mitigate the potential negative impacts of what you do or the products that you do, that you design, and how you can use, let's call it, the resources within your organization to leverage for development or leverage for long-term sustainability. And you view yourself more as a steward than a shareholder of a short-term time frame, the next quarterly report, the next annual report, but viewing your leadership position as an opportunity to be a steward for the future of the organization, but also the community. The way in which you start to think about the business is different. And it unlocks opportunities for collaboration that can make your business more robust. There is lots of examples of that. And COVID created this microclimate where rapid development and innovation took place, where people changed the way in which they do business, and people that were quick to adopt and change were also companies that that showed growth during that period. So I think it's really starting to understand that companies are not islands; they are deeply integrated in society, and society has got a deep impact on them as much as they have an impact on society.
Yeah, no, 100%. And and then I wonder, even thinking of COVID, like the world is more digital and, was a lot more gig workers. Yeah, we've sort of very much quickly changed the way we work. How do you see that? Like as the work digitizes, risks for like already underserved communities in terms of maybe being left behind? And then the corollary to that again, like what is the role of big corporates in helping that?
So one of the things a long time ago, in the technical space, 10 years is a very long time. But 10, 15 years ago, one of our biggest challenges when we rolled out Insite was access to bandwidth. A SaaS solution in the mining industry in South Africa, it was difficult to access the solution on the mining sites because there was no Wi-Fi, there was no technology to connect to the cloud. That has changed. We now know that through the advances in technology, there is various providers that can give access to the internet in rural communities. They've got access to technology. So the opportunity to decentralize economic activities in a way we've never thought about it in the past is present. If we think about how the economy works, and I'm simplifying, for the purposes of illustration, economies used to be, still is today, quite centralized, even though it's globalized. It's centralized around cities and around factories and office parks. The decentralizing of that started with the work from home, the digital economy, more people working from home, learning decentralizing, studying, the access to information and opportunity to learn from your home is more available than ever before, where more people can learn more things easily. You in that space where you can bring learning to the community, you can bring learning to underserved communities. I think our next challenge will be to not just teach people in underserviced communities, giving them access to learning opportunities, but also to give them access to work, decentralized work in underserviced communities, so that money can flow into areas where in the past, it was known by poverty because there's no inflow of money in the areas, and for money to go there is expensive. It's difficult for money to flow into underserviced communities. So I think that's an opportunity. The other side of that is a risk that yes, you've got access to technology, yes, you can learn, but you cannot find work. Irrespective of the fact that you've got a certificate or a degree that you got, in your environment where you are, it's very hard and expensive to then find work to benefit from it, which, it's not I suppose it brings us back to the biomimicry principles of closed loop systems. You need to close the loop in the system, learning, linking it to contribution to the economy as well.
Yeah, no, it is inspiring. And it is like that small action can create, meaningful long-term social impact. And so as you sort of, think broadly about the moment that we are, sometimes one can feel, pessimistic and that, things are all kind of difficult, or maybe optimistic that things are getting better. If you sort of step back and, think about corporates and their roles and the impact that we hope or want or imagine that companies to make, and these different technologies that exist, do you feel sort of optimistic about, about where it goes, or where do you land in terms of looking forward of, the kind of social impact and the kind of changes that we can make?
Sure, that's a hard question, and I must say I go from optimistic to pessimistic, really, depending on the day of the week I wake up on. And I think the world has got the technology available to drive sustainability in a way we've never understood in the past. But we're going to have to think beyond the enrichment of a few companies or a few people, and think about the long-term sustainability of the world. One of the interesting things is, for me, is that the developed economies have got an aging population, and the developing economies have got a young population. And rather than worrying about that, is again that idea of decentralizing education and work so that people can live sustainable lives in their countries of origin, but contribute to developed economies without having to move. And I imagine if that was a vision of our tech giants, how much more sustainable the world could be.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think that too. And just knowing, to me, I take comfort in knowing that we have the technologies and we have the ability to do things. And it is just a question of will, but that feels like a solvable problem rather than a magic invention that we still have to come up with. Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Maritha. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Sylvia. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I wish Links Educate all the very best. I think the work that you do is excellent.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Talent is Everywhere. Make sure to subscribe if you like what you heard, and give us a follow on LinkedIn to continue the conversation on all things career mobility and talent development. Is there a topic you'd love for us to cover in a future episode, or a guest you'd recommend? Drop us an email at hello@linkseducate.com. And if you're looking for support on your talent development strategy, head over to linkseducate.com to learn more about our career mobility solution. That's LYNXeducate.com.